Welcome to Off the Couch Podcast, where we support everything movement, fitness, and performance related. From work, exercise, hobbies, and everything in between. If it inspires you to get off the couch and get moving, we're all about it. So let's dive in. And welcome back to another episode of Off the Couch Podcast. I'm your host, Gobs. Today we're joined by a very special guest, Dr. Ken Shyu. Is that right? Shyu. God, we just went over this. Ken Shyu. He's Doctor of Physical Therapy and one of the founders of Unite Rehab Perform here in Thornton, Colorado. Thank you so much for coming on this episode.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Let's start maybe just get like a brief background or history of who you are, so that way our listeners can know. So in a nutshell, in about 30 seconds, can you tell me from birth until right now who you are? No,
yeah, absolutely.
I'm totally kidding. Where'd you grow up? Did maybe we'll start. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? Did you play sports growing up?
Yeah, so I was born out in New Jersey, over in the East Coast, and we came out here 4 or 5 years ago now. Growing up, I played tennis was my main sport. I played a lot of sports, but tennis was my main focus. I played into college, and yeah, I picked up working out mainly in college, and it's been a consistent part of my life since then.
Oh, sweet. And did you start primarily exercising for training for tennis, or did you kind of get into it separately where you maybe were like bro lifting or doing something else?
Yeah, I think, it was definitely back in like junior year or so of high school where, it was just going to one of those 24-hour fitness gyms and getting pulled into it with some of my high school buddies, and we had no direction, no aim. And
they like, how much can you bench? You're like,
of course.
I don't know, let's find out.
Of course.
That's like the measure of a man. We talked about that before on the podcast.
Yeah.
Like, how much can you bench?
Yeah.
My response is always all of it. Like, how much can you bench? I'm like, all of it. They're like, how many push-ups can you do? I'm like, all of them. Just to be ridiculous. All right, cool. So got into exercise in like high school age, started playing tennis. I've never played tennis, and I got a respect for tennis. It's a very challenging sport, a lot of change of direction. We do shuttle runs here in CrossFit, and regular running CrossFitters we're not like too fond of. We will do it, but we're not fond of it. But something about the change of, so we do shuttle runs, and something about the change of direction, like I'm telling you, it makes it like at least 5 times harder than regular running. And tennis is literally like change of direction.
Yeah, so I've been a tennis player since I was very, very young, and like I said, I played into college, and I took a really long break. Must have been like 14, 15 years, and I actually just recently started getting back into tennis. But yeah, that change of direction, that definitely is like very different from the normal movements we do in a gym setting. So that's awesome that you guys have shuttle runs, have this change of direction, because you want to be practicing your sport somehow and introducing that, because on a day-to-day as humans we just go forwards and backwards, not so much turning, twisting, and that change of direction. You kind of lose that as you age. But with the consistent training that I've been doing myself, whether it's here, whether it's over in my gym, it definitely helped me elevate my tennis game. So that was very interesting to see. Even though I haven't touched a tennis racket in like 15 years, my game actually got better by doing everything outside of the sport.
Imagine that. Imagine that. Huh. Yeah, and that is an interesting topic. We've talked about that on previous podcasts as well, about how, when you're training for a sport, we have our general like hierarchy of sports over on our little, it's like a food pyramid, but it's over there. And on the very top is sport. And on the bottom is like, training. And that's what he's getting at. It's like, you should, if you're playing sports, you shouldn't just play the sport. You want to spend a lot of time training for the sport,
Absolutely.
Different facets of training, change of direction, ladder drills, speed drills, whatever. I've always been curious because I never played tennis, and I haven't even really ever tried to play an actual game. I've like messed around with a racket. It's hard. It takes a level of coordination also, not just change direction. But I'm curious, what are the like common ailments or injuries you would see in tennis? Because like I would assume, and this is just an assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, that we might see like a shoulder or maybe an elbow thing going on, but like lower extremity with change of direction, I always think of like we're going to see things happening with like ankle sprains or like some type of knee ACL, MCL type deal. What would you say would be the more common ones? Like I'm not saying tennis is dangerous. I'm just saying maybe to look out for,
Yeah, of course. So the biggest one, like you alluded to already, your elbow, right? It's an injury so bad that they named it after tennis.
Tennis elbow.
right? Golfer's elbow, tennis elbow, just on the other side. But that's definitely number one, and that's when you're just strictly bending your elbow, not using your whole body to generate force, and that impact that you're constantly absorbing at your elbow joint causes tennis elbow.
Oh wow. So tennis elbow is kind of from bad technique, is what you're saying.
Basically.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
it's
So
an
there's a way to
efficient
avoid. See, I
transfer
didn't
of
even know
force.
that. I just thought you get tennis elbow from playing tennis, and it's like, yeah, you play it long enough, you're going to get tennis elbow. Goes to show how much I know about the game of tennis. What I do know is it's amazing for conditioning, because one of our best athletes, Acacia, she's a coach here. I'm calling you out, Acacia. She played tennis growing up and in college, and she is very good at CrossFit. And so I think there's a level of transferability there that like tennis players have a pretty high level of fitness. So you got to run, you got to accelerate quick and stop quick, and then do that for like, depending on your volley for a while.
No, absolutely. Like I was just talking with someone recently about the demands of tennis. Like matches could go on for 2, 3, 4 hours at the pro level, and you have to definitely condition your body to be able to play.
Could you imagine?
For that length of time, as well as out in the hot summer heat.
Yeah, you're exposed to the elements. I have another question about tennis, and then we're gonna like dive into you. But I'm curious just because I don't know. So like, I watch tennis sometimes on TV, and I'm always fascinated by like the grunts they let out, like huh.
Sure.
Is that a technique thing, or is that just everyone kind of has their own deal, where it's like they just kind of make it up, or like do you have to grunt? I feel like you have to grunt at the professional level. It's like huh, yeah.
Well, two facets to that. First one, I think there's a physical element to it, and second of all, there's a mental element to it. So kind of like if you ever take any combat sports or martial arts of some sort, they encourage that just because it shows your opponent like, you gotta be ready for me. Like I'm ready for you. I'm not scared of you. I'm ready to give it my all.
It's kind of like
there's a mental component to it.
Like a battle cry.
Kind of.
Okay.
There's definitely that element to it, but the physical element, I think it's more of like it's a quick like Valsalva, right? Because you're stiffening at the moment of contact, and then right after you contact the ball, you release that air.
It's like exhaling. So
Yeah.
Okay, it's like reminding you to breathe.
Yeah.
It's a common thing we see here in the weightlifting or CrossFit realm, where under extreme movements or
Yeah,
maybe
your
foreign movements,
1RMs.
people will hold their breath. And so I'm always coaching people like, hey, like, that's why you let a little out on those heavy lifts where you're like, tss, like just letting a little
Exactly.
pressure out. So it's something similar.
Yeah, it's breath control.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, now I won't make fun of them as much. Some of them are cool. I like the noises. Some of them, there was this guy, and I don't know. I'm just ridiculous, but I was making fun of him. His was kind of more like a, I don't know. My wife could explain. It sounded weird, but anyways, so you were playing tennis. You played at the collegiate level, and you went to school to become a doctor of physical therapy. So first question is, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did you start playing tennis, and was there somehow a segue where it's like, hey, I want to work with athletes, or did you decide you wanted to work with athletes and be a physical therapist before the tennis thing, or were they intertwined in any way, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, so my own injuries with tennis, it was a lot of like low back stuff going on for myself, and I went through physical therapy growing up, but it never got me fully back to being pain-free while I was, especially during a tennis season. So I saw the need to have physical therapy more like to offer like true sports medicine, where they did address the needs of an athlete, not just to get me back pain-free, but to find out what the cause of my symptoms were. My experience growing up was, physical therapy is just addressing symptoms. Like no one actually looks at my tennis form except for my tennis coach. Fast forward many years, like that's what we do here. Like I break down someone's sport. I might not know all the nuances of it, but I know the main movements that are required of that movement of that sport and the demands of the sport, so that I can be that bridge that connects the sport specific coach and the PT from 10, 20 years ago. So yeah, going back to like what you're asking me with like school, like did I know I want to become a PT? I would say at a fairly young age I did, but I didn't know how I would be able to bridge my passion for sports, athletics, and movements to a rehab setting. Because many times it was viewed as like, if you're injured, go see a PT. You don't see a PT because you're not injured. But now what we're trying to do is create awareness of being proactive, then to take your health into your own hands, and that we can become a resource for our community to offer that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something big that, we preach here, that I'm always saying to myself and to our members and athletes here, that's like, it's not just about rehab and recovery from like injury or ailments, but it's a lot of it's like, we call it prehab. That's like, hey, if you're ahead of the 8 ball here, and you maybe go in even, when you're not feeling hurt or ailed, and you work on certain things, movement patterns, core stability, whatever it is, we can also help prevent these future injuries just by doing a little bit of work on the front end. And so that was something really cool, working with y'all, that I knew, but I started to recognize even more doing it personally. That's like, man, this is worth its weight in gold, to be able to have this kind of preventive work, so that way you can continue to do what you love for longer, and hopefully more time of being injury or ailment free.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is like the goal of playing sports. I always tell my people, a good athlete is a healthy athlete. And so like a lot of people are like, oh, I'm training for a competition or something. What's one of the best suggestions you can give me? And my my number one answer is always like, stay healthy. Like, that is number one. A good athlete's a healthy athlete. You don't lose time in training and stuff if you're not injured. Like, injury, it happens. I get it. I've been through many of them, but it does take time off your training, and it kind of throws a wrench in your plans. And so I tell my athletes, healthy athlete's a good athlete. I can't talk today. And so that's something, working with y'all, that I really recognize that I already knew, but like I actually got to see it pay off. So you became a doctor of physical therapy out of college, and
After graduate school.
After graduate school, yeah, it's
Another few years.
Yeah, this whole ordeal of school, and then you started a business called Unite Rehab Perform. And before we jump into that, was there work you did prior to that, maybe as like internship, or like just work that you got into before you started your own business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a few years off in between my bachelor's degree and going back to get my doctorate degree. And during that time, I was working as a strength coach. I was an EMT for 10 years. I was working in a spinal cord injury gym as a trainer. And I was able to see, like, inside and outside of the world of physical therapy, how businesses operate and what services like are available to our communities. And it's very limited with, like, going back to what I was talking about before, with performance training. Like, people think, I can only go to performance training if I'm injury free, or I can only go to physical therapy if I have an injury. But it's one continuum. Like, sometimes if I'm a healthy athlete, like, I might tweak something where I might need some extra recovery time, and being able to offer that service under the same roof where we have that continuum of rehab and performance, which you do now, has been very valuable for our community members.
Absolutely. And I see a ton of benefit from this. It's great because, like, I go see Dr. Ken on a regular basis, and just depending on the week, it's like, depending on what I'm doing. So it's like, I go in and he's like, how you feeling? And it's like, I'm feeling good. We do some nice, like, stability core work. It's not easy. It's usually like some balance related stuff. It's really good, and it's good work. I'm dripping sweat. And then there's other days that's like, oh, I'm feeling beat up today, I'm feeling really sore, or what have you. And then we just do some passive work. So it's kind of like this evaluation of like what's necessary for the person or the athlete at the time, and what's going to give them the biggest bang for their buck. And it's like you're bridging the gap between the two of those of like, do you need physical therapy, rehab, or are we looking more for like the performance edge? And it's kind of cool to see how, it's not set in stone. Right. On a day-to-day or week-to-week basis even. It's like, hey, like, how are we feeling today? Well, we're feeling good, cool. Like, let's do some performance work. And it's like, oh, not feeling so great. It's like, okay, let's do some recovery work and get you trying to feel a little bit better. And like, I love that about it.
Awesome.
So you moved out to Colorado about 4 years ago. And at this time, had you started Unite Rehab Perform yet, or did you move to Colorado to start this business? Or I guess what I'm asking is, why did you move to Colorado?
Well, I was chasing my girlfriend, now wife, at the time.
Nice. Nice.
But
I would do the same thing.
Yeah, I started as soon as I landed here. Yeah. It was
cool. And then so
you
got this inspiration to start Unite Rehab Perform. your own business. That inspiration came from what you just talked about, seeing all that stuff, deciding to like, I guess, what was the final, like, I guess, straw or whatever that made you decide, like, yes, I'm going to start my own business. Like, I'm going to do this. And what made you decide to call it Unite?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it can be a very long answer, but I will try and keep that short.
3 minutes.
Yeah.
And counting.
Unite, again, like uniting the services of rehab and performance. Just knowing that it takes a team to develop an athlete. It's not just one coach. It's not just one physical therapist. It's not one person. You need a team of people to be your supporting cast to get you to that end goal of yours. That is the main reason of why I wanted to call this Unite.
Awesome.
Just to bring together everyone under one roof to support all of our athletes and to help them reach that main goal.
And I'm a big advocate of that. And it's like that old saying, like, it takes a village. It takes a village to raise a kid. It takes a village to raise an athlete. And you're absolutely right. Yeah. Just from what I've seen in my own experience, it's like you need your support system of your supportive family and friends. And then you need your supportive community members that are also helping support and drive you. And then you need your supportive coach that understands kind of that is. And then you need your supportive, like, people that are helping, your practitioners, whether they're helping you recover, helping you with nutrition, or whatever it is, helping you maybe get that competitive edge by doing, like VO2 max work, like stuff like that. So yeah, I absolutely agree. It takes a village to become a very successful at almost anything, but specifically an athlete. I heard something, and I don't know how true this is, but I think it's true, that LeBron James spends over $1 million a year on just his like rehab and recovery. And it just goes to show how important that is.
It's amazing, the players now that at the professional level, that they're able to play into their 40s and still compete at the highest level and win Super Bowls and win tennis majors.
Which is something crazy because, 30-ish years ago, this was not a common thing.
Yeah.
You didn't see him that old. And so you got to ask yourself, looking at these sports statistics, well, what are some of the main differences? And I think one of the main differences is the emphasis on that recovery and performance.
Yeah, 100%. Rewind 10 years ago, and even some reporters nowadays, commentators, will say, they've hit their prime, they reached 30 years old, they're on the decline. But that's really not true. Like,
not anymore, yeah.
Athletes across every sport that succeed in their 30s, if not 40s.
Oh, yeah. Like some of the best athletes right now in all the sports are like late 30s. And, the best quarterback of all time, I don't even like Tom Brady, but he is he's like 42.
You got to respect his game.
I respect his accolades and his skill. And I just, I'm a Broncos fan, so I don't really like Tom Brady. But either way. Yeah. So there's been this emphasis on recovery and performance that we're seeing it pay off dividends. And, especially lately, and you see the highest level athletes are emphasizing this. And it's like, so we're trying to share this like knowledge of wisdom with the surrounding community, and especially maybe like athletes or young and upcoming athletes. That's like, hey, if you emphasize this now, sky's kind of the limit on how long you can play this sport. Like, we're seeing people into their 40s. So
careers are derailed because of overtraining, injuries that are not addressed, or playing through injuries. Like, there's so much that can be done on the forefront before all of that eventually happens down the road. So
to aid like injury prevention.
Exactly.
And like, we're not saying you can 100% prevent injury, but you can lessen your chances of getting injured. And if you can lessen your chances, I don't know why you wouldn't.
Yep.
Because, as an athlete, getting injured, it's a speed bump for sure. And if you hit too many of those speed bumps before you know it, you're my age, and your window for being a professional athlete is getting shorter and shorter. I'm 36, almost 37, and I just started playing ice hockey, and the oldest like hockey players are maybe like 38, 39. So, I had like 2 years to be a professional NHL
Absolutely.
player. So,
Yeah.
From never playing ever until playing like a year ago. I got this, guys. No, I'm just kidding. So you do like physical therapy, performance training, rehab, and stuff. And so I think a lot of people at face value can like look at you or look at any physical therapist, and they have this generalization of what we think a PT is, a physical therapist. It's like, oh, I'm only going to go to a PT when I'm recovering from an injury or an ailment, usually prescribed by my doctor, I've done it multiple times. I'd like broken arm or something. Okay, you need to go to PT. And so I think society has this image in our head that we should only do PT when we're recovering from injury. And so how is Unite different than traditional PT? And I think we've touched on it a little, but maybe describe a little more.
Yeah. So this is a huge area that I'm very passionate about. I'm very passionate about speaking and letting everyone know that, what is physical therapy and how are we different? So physical therapy, many people think it's just because, I had an injury, I got surgery and I need rehab afterwards. And then my doctor sends me to this place. I need to go 3 times a week for the next 6 weeks. And then, at the end of that, I should be good to go. And a lot of that reasoning is not based off of the best medical decision making for the patient. And that is largely because of insurance companies. Insurance companies are companies, and they want to make a huge profit, and every year they make more and more money, and they slash the reimbursements that they pay out to physical therapists. And that means that the quality of care goes way down. PTs can spend less time with an athlete when they're recovering, and they need a ton of one-on-one attention to get through that pain range, to restore range of motion, to gain back their strength, and start transitioning to true return to sport movements that are specific to their position, to their level of sport. And all of that is wiped away because, whoever is at the top dictating the care of all these athletes and patients is very unfortunately controlled by the healthcare insurance companies. So how we go about doing it is that we are an out-of-network provider, and we make decisions solely based off of the interests of our athlete in front of us, not by the billing codes that would get me the best reimbursement rates, but I know that you don't need that service. So we take away all the unnecessary insurance. We take away all the unnecessary
the hoops
constraints that the insurance companies put on us. But we make the person in front of us our main priority. What do they need? What kind of stuff do they need to succeed and to return to their sport at full capacity?
Yeah, which I can testament to, the insurance part. My wife works for a law firm, and she does insurance bad faith, which is literally working with insurance companies that they're not faithful to you. So you pay your premiums and you do everything you're supposed to do. And then when it comes time for them to pay, you're injured or whatever, they don't pay. That's called bad faith. That's what my wife literally does. So I know quite a bit about that part of the insurance. I also used to do claims for Kaiser Permanente. And so I know quite a bit about the insurance side from a healthcare standpoint. And I've also experienced it, and he's absolutely right. So when I was recovering from my shoulder surgery, they prescribed me, I think it was 8 PT sessions, and that's all I was approved for was 8. So it's if you're not done by 8, well, good luck to you. And it's literally, that's kind of how it worked. And some of the stuff we did was really good stuff, and other stuff I'd be laying there and I'm laying next to a 70, 80-year-old person right next to me, and they're doing the exact same stuff. And I don't know, I'm not a doctor of physical therapy or anything, but just at face value, I'm I don't know if I should be doing the same thing as an 80. I'm not 70 or 80 years old. I'm, at the time, a younger, still athletic athlete. I want to be an athlete person. So it's kind of that one size fits all, but then also you have those constraints of those insurance companies that's hey, you get 8 PT sessions, so whether you only need 3 or you need 20, we're giving you 8, and that's what you're going to work with. And so it literally was to the point where I felt I went in there. I had this cookie cutter program that, these PTs are also they would have lines of people next. So, that probably gets hard to deal with on their side, but it's this cookie cutter program that's just hey, your 8 sessions are up. You should be good now. Good luck. Hopefully it's you mend a bird and mend its wing. It broke its wing, and you just kind of throw it out of the nest and
hoping that it flies.
Hope it can fly.
Yeah.
And hey, good luck. And if you can't fly, well, either go get approval for more, or well, you're kind of screwed. Yeah. So, and working with you guys, it is a breath of fresh air to see that personalization that you take. As far as the individual is concerned, that's hey, what exactly is happening with you? What are you trying to do? And what are you trying to get back to doing? And I feel like that's an important question when it comes to recovery. Is like, are you just trying to get back to like, hey, I just want to live like a normal life and just be able to use my limb or extremity again or whatever? Or it's like, no, I want to get back to playing my sport at a high level.
Right.
And, when you start to kind of ask these questions to people and work with them individually, you start to see what society says, like miracles start happening. And it's actually not miracles. It's just when you do actually specific work, you start to see the benefits come in a lot quicker than just the traditional cookie cutter program. And so what you guys are doing over there is amazing. And I can testament to this myself, being through both sides of it. That's like, when it's individualized, it is so much more worth it. You're going to get the best bang for your buck. You're going to feel better faster. You're not going to waste your time doing random stuff. It's really, really good stuff, and we just need more of it. So, like, with
Thank you for saying all that. I really
it's true.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm not trying to hype you up. It's true. I've been through the system, and I've seen both sides, and it is so much better that way. So, if you have the ability to see someone, see Dr. Ken at Unite or Dr. Sarah, that's something I would recommend doing. And if you're even not in our state, something similar to that, I don't know if you know it, and maybe we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But the next question that I had, and I think we kind of just touched on this, but since we're talking healthcare, so it's like, how does Unite address today's healthcare system? Like how are you said there's certain like healthcare constraints or maybe hoops we have to jump through. So it's how are you guys addressing that? And I think maybe you might have touched on it a little bit more.
Yeah. So typically when someone gets injured, what the insurance company and what most people think they have to do is they have to go either to the emergency room or they have to go to urgent care, or sometimes they skip that and they try and get an appointment with their primary care provider. And many times the primary care provider is booked for a month or two out and you can't get in. And at that point, like, your acute injury just turned chronic and you have not seen a primary care provider when something could have been done. And then once you get into the door with the primary care, a lot of them will just tell you to rest. Like, we've had so many people come to us.
Literally, I hear that all the time.
Yeah, either they like
So
get their
annoying.
back out from deadlifting or their shoulder hurts from snatching, and the doctor says rest. That is
So
the
vague.
worst. Yeah, that's the worst advice, because rest will not heal anything.
Well, it's like, and what exactly does rest mean? Like,
Right. There's so many different passive recovery, things that we can talk about later, but things that you can start doing from day one of injury to just begin that healing process. So injury happens, you go to the primary care, and then when you finally get into the door of the primary care provider, they tell you, oh, let me refer you to the orthopedist. And it takes another few weeks to get into the door of the orthopedist. Okay, now your injury is a month, 2 months, 3 months in, and you get to the ortho. They spend 5-10 minutes with you saying like, okay, I can give you a shot to help with the pain control, or you just continue to rest it, or just don't deadlift anymore. You don't need to. But as an athlete, hearing that, it is very, very frustrating. So get it? Like, I've been told the same thing.
infuriating.
Yeah. So we do not want to tell our clients, our athletes, that they can't do something. There's different levels of doing things, different intensities. We want to empower them rather than give them more limitations. So going back to the ortho, after you see the ortho, sometimes it will say, okay, now you can go see your physical therapist. And going back to insurance,
If
some
you're lucky,
insurances,
and if your insurance covers it.
right. And now you got the okay from the orthopedist. Okay, now you go do your PT, or maybe you wanted an MRI, but your insurance won't let you get the MRI, and you gotta go to your PT. Side note about MRIs: they aren't the end all be all. Sometimes they show a lot of stuff, but people deep dive a little bit too much into like what the MRI results truly mean, and that actually prevents them from doing things that they can actually keep doing.
Yeah. And like, I've seen that work both ways too. So it's like, the MRI is not the end all be all. Sometimes it shows stuff that maybe isn't necessarily the root cause or whatever. And other
Correct.
times, like, we had someone here that having shoulder issues, got like 2 MRIs. They're like, no, nothing's wrong, and they're just shoulder issues. And finally, they just like went in and they did some arthroscopic work, and come to find out, yeah, there was issues in there that they had to work with. So the MRI is not always 100% accurate, I think.
Right.
Is what we're getting
And
at.
you always want to be more conservative too. So that's where physical therapy comes in from. Like, we want to avoid, taking painkillers. We want to avoid having unnecessary surgeries, and we want to, empower our athlete to get back to what they were doing in the first place prior to their injury. So,
which is what I love, and like I feel like that's how all of our healthcare system isn't perfect. Obviously, it needs some work. I've said this before, I'm not like smart enough to know this exact solution, but it needs to be better. And where I feel like get it wrong so much is we just talked like the vagueness of the recovery, and also the waiting. I went through the same steps you talked about. That's like, go to your doctor and then get a referral to your specialist, which is like your orthopedic whatever, and then get a referral for PT if they deem it necessary. And it's like, it's crazy that by that time you've spent a month to 6 weeks getting referrals till you're finally actually doing some rehab recovery type stuff. And at that point, you've had 6 weeks for that to set in. And one of my biggest frustrations when you're sick, I called like 6 months ago when I was sick, and I was like, hey, I'm not feeling good. Can I come in to see the doctor and maybe see if I need antibiotics or something? They're like, yeah, we'll get you in 2 weeks. And I was like, well, I hope I'm either well or dead in 2 weeks. So no thanks. Anyways, and it's crazy because sometimes you can't even see a PT without a referral, just depending on the office you go to.
Right.
And so what you're doing at United is you're just cutting out the middleman and saying
So on that topic, like, Colorado is a direct access state for physical therapy, meaning that you can come to us as your first point of contact from an injury. And based off of like what we find in the initial evaluation, I can let you know if I'm the right person to continue your care. Even in some hospital systems, in emergency rooms, they're having physical therapists do some of the triaging, because a lot of the injuries that are coming in the emergency rooms are musculoskeletal based, and we are trained to treat all musculoskeletal stuff, and to be able to refer out when we don't have the training for, and to recognize that, because a lot of our prerequisite courses and even our level 1, level 2 courses are the same courses that our primary care providers are taking. So we do have that training to know what we can do, but more importantly, to know when to refer out.
Yeah. And that just goes to show like the importance of the physical therapist. And like the great thing about Unite is, if you're going to end up at the physical therapist eventually, man, wouldn't it be great to just cut out those middle steps and be able to go right there? Well, you can. Hit up Dr. Ken. We're going to get his contact info before the end of this. But just, speaking personally, that would have been a godsend for me if I would have had it in my previous injuries or recoveries before you and I had the pleasure of meeting. So if you're someone that's maybe working with like an injury or an ailment and you're not sure exactly what to do, hit up your local physical therapist, or if you're in our area, hit up Dr. Ken at Unite Rehab Perform, and he can give you some advice, or even just give you an initial consultation to give you advice. And maybe it's not even to work with you. Maybe it's just like, hey, this is something you need to go somewhere else for or something, but at least it's a good starting point, because chances are you're going to end up at PT anyways. So like, let's cut out the middlemen and let's just get down to the root of this and get working on it as soon as possible. So that way you're not sitting in limbo for 2 months waiting for referral upon referral upon referral. So most people go to physical therapy for recovery or rehab. They're trying to recover from an injury. That's generally, when you think of physical therapy, I think most people probably think about that. They're like, I don't need to go to physical therapy because I'm not injured or whatever. And so you work with people that are recovering from injury, ailments, but then also performance. And is there like a definitive line or definition that you would use when you're transitioning from rehab to performance? Like, when would I know as a recovering athlete, or maybe just an athlete in general, when I'm going to be transitioning from rehab work to performance work?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great question. I think the main word that kind of defines when rehab stops and when performance begins is the presence of pain. That is probably just my one word response to that. And to elaborate a little bit more about it, typically more of the rehab work is going to be, of course, addressing pain, Number two, your range of motion. We want to make sure all of your joints have full range of motion, because many times it's either limited by pain or it's limited by just lack of mobility in one of your joints or soft tissue. So that hands-on work that we can do to help open you up, get you moving better and feeling better. And then once you have full range of motion, then we start transitioning more to stability and strength training. Now, that phase slowly creeps more into like the performance side of, sport specificity, getting back under the barbell. Like, we want to make sure, our athlete is pain-free after a workout, has full range of motion, and has a good foundational strength. And foundational strength, again, is another topic that we've talked about in the past, where an athlete who has been potentially like deconditioned from the injury, and hopefully they're not that far off, because we try and keep our athletes as conditioned as possible during their entire rehab process, so that even when they need to take time off, like, we're still working other joints. But that foundational strength, again, is so crucial to have before getting back to the intensity that an athlete was working out before. Because sometimes, like, the cause of the injury was because they didn't have that foundational strength. And that's, sometimes rehab is a good time to just humble the person down and be like, hey, this is probably what led to your injury, because you didn't have enough strength or muscle endurance or capacity to handle the loads and the repetitions that you were doing those at. And this is a good time to kind of just, let's pull back a bit. Let's refine this. Let's make this part of your prehab in the future. So your rehab currently with us turns into your prehab in the future. And that will help mitigate all of your injuries in the future.
Yeah, and I am a testament to this. So essentially what we're saying is like, okay, once we pretty much got you mostly pain-free, besides like maybe some ailments you had prior to injury, I don't know, but let's just say pain-free. You're pain-free, we're going to go into performance training now. And man, this is where I think the meat and potatoes is of what you do and what practitioners like yourself offer that most people miss out on is, they're just there for the recovery part. That's like, oh, okay, my whatever's feeling better, my shoulder's feeling better, I don't need PT anymore. And I'm like, man, you really stopped at the point where like you were about to get the most benefit from it. So injury sucks, and I've been through multiple injuries and surgeries, but I can tell you there's always the silver lining of these dark clouds. And the silver lining is that part of the recovery process is the performance work. Once you've recovered that ligament or that joint or whatever, and you can start doing that performance work. And what it does is it's exactly what you said, where it works on this foundational strength of that joint, that ligament, that muscle to support load and speed. So then that way, what it's essentially doing is you're pretty much building that muscle group up so much. It's like a what's the word I'm looking for here? It's like a level of armor around your muscle that's just going to help.
Capacity.
Yeah.
I just refer to that as like the
muscular capacity to help prevent injury and stuff. And one of the main reasons that I see injury either in sports or specifically what we do here in CrossFit is not because of a movement. It's because there's lack of foundational strength to support that movement. And the most common thing I can tell you is when we see injuries in something that's explosive, like sprinting, which if you haven't sprinted for a long time, you're at high risk of injury if you just try to go sprint, because you're asking your muscles to perform at 100% capacity and explosiveness, and they need to be trained for that. Because if they're not, it's not saying you will get injured, but your chances of getting injured or getting a pain or something is much higher than if that muscle's trained. And so if we train those muscles to handle that explosiveness, that capacity, then their chances of getting injured are much less likely.
Yeah, 100%.
And like that's that foundational strength. And we talk about that in CrossFit with kipping and stuff. It's like, hey, we want to be able to do some strict pull-ups or strict handstand push-ups before we start kipping these movements, because it's adding a level of difficulty and dynamic movement to this movement. So we want the movement pattern to be very strong before we speed it up, essentially, is what we're saying.
Right.
And so that's where that foundational strength would come into play.
Master your pause reps, master your tempos, then, start adding load, and then do some of these more plyometric movements.
And that's literally what we do and what I do when I work with you on the performance level. Is like, man, we break down the movement to like the most almost simple form of that movement and start from there. And it's like building balance, core stability, which is like I think in all sports, core stability is probably like one of your most important things to focus on. Is, you keep your core stable, everything else is going to build from there. And so we're working on, the balance of core stability. Like, stuff is small and as minuscule as like, where is the weight at in your feet, and the balance in the balls of your feet and stuff. What are your toes doing? Like, it's crazy. And this is stuff that, like, man, when you break it down to this small level and start geeking out about it, you realize how much of an impact it has on the macro level.
Yeah.
And so it's like, man, these tiny things matter. But it's like, how many of us, or you, I'm talking to you, listener, are going to work on these things by yourself? And I'll tell you right now, I strive to be a good CrossFitter, and like, I love athletics, and I'm good about training and stuff. But when it comes to working on these tiny little things and these accessories, like, I'll be the first to admit I'm not great at it. Not because I don't know, because I do, but I think it's just about doing it. Or maybe having
building a habit.
It's habitual, and having somebody help you. So that's where, that's where
oversight.
Dr. Ken comes into play, and he's like, hey, let's do this. And I'm like, holy crap, I've never done this, and it's amazing. Well, at the time, sometimes it's pretty hard, but it's amazing. It pays off dividends. And I've been playing ice hockey, and I get better every week, and I see Dr. Ken every week. So is there a correlation? I don't know. You tell me.
I hope so.
But so what we do here in CrossFit, we talked about maybe the commonalities of maybe ailments or injuries you would see in tennis. And so, I've been in CrossFit, the CrossFit world, for I think almost 14 years now, and I've been coaching it for like 12, and been an owner of a gym for a little bit. And I would say, the more common injuries I see in CrossFit, and maybe you could testament to this working with some of the people you've seen that do CrossFit, is, more commonly we're going to see stuff that's like, I would say the common three is shoulder, back, knee. And not in any specific order, but I would say out of the most ones, those are probably the most common ailments I hear about, whether it's an actual injury or just an ailment, my shoulder feels funny or something. And so I guess, like, how, working with your experience and your advice, how specifically would you work with CrossFit athletes to help prevent, either get them out of pain or prevent injury or pain?
Right. So again, kind of talking about what we just went over with how a lot of your rehab activities, rehab movements, rehab exercises will be your prehab exercises, right? Just at different intensities. So in terms of like how we help CrossFit athletes with pain or how to prevent pain, a big part of it is an educational component of what does their day-to-day look like prior to coming into the gym. Are they recovering properly? Are they fueling themselves correctly? And I'm sure this is a conversation that you and your staff have too, with like how you prep your athletes to come in here ready to work. Like, if you have not eaten all day, if you don't drink water, like, that's how you fuel your body to be able to lift heavy weights. So that's number one. That's the easiest stuff to do. Again, like getting enough sleep, managing stress, because that is a huge factor that affects performance, physical performance. And those are just like the ground level stuff that we make sure that we cover. And then the other side of it with an educational component is understanding how the body is supposed to move. Like, where are we supposed to get the movement from in order to accomplish a snatch, a squat, a clean and jerk? Are you compensating somewhere? Are you leaning to one side? Are you lacking shoulder flexibility and mobility in order to go overhead? Because constantly, like, too often our world is very forward flexed right now. We're all on our phones.
Yeah, look at me. Look at the way I'm sitting right now. Oh, sit up.
We don't get into extension. In order to get into good overhead mobility, overhead stability movements, we need to have, good extension in our thoracic spines and in our shoulders and our lats and whatnot. But there's a huge component of like, what do you do outside of the gym that leads into some of these bad habits that you might have or restrictions that you might be experiencing?
Yeah, and I think probably one of the biggest ones that I see with what we do in the CrossFit realm is, CrossFitters, they're a special breed of human. And I love CrossFit and CrossFitters, but we also, there's a level of something about our mentality where we like hard work. CrossFit's not easy. And so in order to do CrossFit, you have to have a level of you that likes hard work. It's just every workout is not easy. You're going to pretty much maximum sustainable pace almost every workout, which heart rate is high, lungs are on fire, muscles are burning. It's very uncomfortable. And CrossFitters are very good at this. And I think the issue that they have is they're a little too good at it, as in like we can easily overtrain and do too much exercise or too much CrossFit. That is a thing. You can definitely, there's too much of a good thing. And you probably see this in athletics and stuff as well. But, you know, specifically CrossFit, I see people that overtrain. And I've been guilty of this in my past too. And that's why sometimes I need to step away and check myself, or maybe have someone else. Otherwise, these are usually the reasons why I end up with ailments and stuff, is a level of overtraining or usually under recovering. And so what I'm always telling our people is like, hey, you know, make sure you're focusing on some recovery. Make sure, you know, if you up your training volume, you're upping your recovery volume as well. So, you know, your recovery should kind of shadow your training. And if you're training a bunch and your training volume's high, then your recovery volume and stuff needs to be high. And so I'm always telling my people, make sure you're taking recovery days and stuff. And I feel like a big disconnect with our people is, number one, that's just like, okay, recovery, what exactly does that mean? But then, you know, if we get a little more into it with our people, we start talking about, okay, well, there's different types of recovery, and there's like active and passive recovery.
Right.
And I think with a lot of people, they get confused on like, you know, what's the difference between active and passive recovery, and like what is a good recovery day look like? Because, you know, I'll get people that's like, oh, I went for a 5-mile jog yesterday as my recovery day, and I'm like, that's not a recovery day for pretty much anyone. So you know, we're not recovering properly. And I think a lot of that root is just maybe a lack of understanding of how to recover properly, but also the difference between active and passive recovery. So what would you say is the difference between active passive recovery?
Yeah, so kind of like what I already just mentioned with passive recovery, you know, there's the whole, am I eating correctly? Am I hydrating correctly? Am I getting enough protein intake? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I managing all my stressors? Like, all of those are the most fundamental things to help with someone's recovery. So if you can check all those boxes, that's the most important passive recovery.
So
right
you say
there.
like passive is more stuff that we can do that's like not movement related or elevating the heart
That's
rate.
stuff you can do at the home.
Gotcha.
Right? But more so on our end, passive recovery can also mean myofascial decompression, also known as cupping, you know, soft tissue mobilization, or some people like to call like different types of massages, or joint mobilizations, and acupuncture, dry needling. Anything that a practitioner can do for you where you don't have to work and you're just laying on the table. That's
Usually the
recovery
nicest
typically.
part. It depends on what you're doing. Dry needling works great benefits, but I'm not the biggest fan.
Yeah.
And that's just a personal thing, but it
So
is very good for you.
On that note, we do have a new machine. It is called the EPAT, or shockwave therapy, which you'll have to try out.
I can't wait.
It's a great alternative to dry needling, and there's no needles involved. It's
Perfect.
literally
Sounds like it was made for me.
a transducer head, and it sends acoustic waves into the tissue.
Oh, great. And it's supposed to work similar to dry needling?
Yes.
Damn, that's
Yeah.
cool.
So, you know, these are all great ways of passive recovery. And in terms of what you were mentioning with active recovery, what does that look like? It's not running 5 miles, although that
Some
can be
people
a
think
good
it is.
form of, you know, training. You know, if you typically go from like a run, bike, swim type of thing. So that could be a good way to, you know, cross train where you aren't overdoing one activity over, you know, a long training session. But in terms of active, I like to think of that as, yeah, I might take a short walk. I'm going to keep the intensity low. I'm going to do a lot of things that could be a workout, but, you know, just get the blood flowing. That's the main thing of recovery. We want to keep oxygen and blood flowing in the body, because that's what helps our cells regenerate and to recover and to continuously help grow our muscles, right? So a lot of our active recovery stuff it could be like body weight squats, not at the intensity, again, of a workout. It could be more dynamic stretching that day. It could be, like I was saying, like, you know, a nice leisurely walk, just not at the running pace. Like, all these ways are great ways to get oxygen and blood flow throughout the body.
Nice. Yeah, and I think that's where some of the disconnect happens with some people when it comes to active recovery is we just have a tendency to overdo it. And so active recovery and what you're getting at is it could be as simple as a walk, but I think, excuse me, what I usually try to tell my people is like, you want to stay in like what we call quote unquote zone 2 or lower, which, zone 2 work is kind of related to like capacity or heart rate where it's
That's a great way to measure it too.
yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
a very, for you, a relatively low active heart rate. It's not a resting heart rate. It's just, you could have a conversation while you're working, a very like, a brisk walk or a very light jog pace. You could hold that pace for about a half an hour. And when you're done, you're fine. You're not dying. You're not sore from the session you just did or anything. It's, it's just this very, very thought out, or not thought out, but just, very paced process that is not this thing that's going to kill you or get your heart rate up too high.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be something that's all pre-planned out. You can just kind of take it based on how your body feels that day. You can be less stringent on yourself with like staying on top of what's programmed, and that's more so for your training days. That's you want to have those set goals during training to work towards something. But when it comes to recovery, like that needs to be mobile, that needs to be flexible and adaptable to how your physical body is feeling.
Absolutely. And I love that because I've made that mistake in the past of like having my set days of training and my set recovery days where it's like, it's almost like a list, a checklist, and you're like obligated to do these things. And like, I have to go do my backwards walking on the air or whatever. And it's like, you don't have to do any of that stuff. First of all, you get to, so let's try to change that mindset to a growth mindset. But the next thing is like exactly what you said. And sometimes training is this way too, but especially active recovery. That's like, how are you feeling today? And let's go off of that. And what do we feel like needs maybe a little bit more attention today, especially if you're sore or having an ailment that's like, oh, well, I was supposed to do some quad work today, but my quads feel fine. It's actually my lower back's actually kind of lit up or killing me. It's like, all right, well, let's work on that. And maybe it does involve a little bit of quad work, depending, but let's see how you feel that day and kind of go from there. So you don't always have to have this plan set in stone that you have to stick with. I've gotten in that mindset before in the past, and it's actually more detrimental than anything, where it's like, you have to do the X, Y, Z. And it's like, no, I've seen more benefit from day to day. How do I feel? And what can I do today? And what is relative intensity today? Today, a perfect example. I just got back from a lake trip, pretty well rested. I feel pretty good overall. I worked out a little there. And I went pretty hard in the workout today and I felt good. Feels good. Intensity level is high for me. But another day, who knows? Maybe tomorrow I'm going to feel thrashed and we come in and my intensity level, might feel the same, but I might have to scale it back just because I'm feeling a little thrashed, and that's perfectly okay. You don't have to force yourself to do things every day. It's like, it's better to go off of how you feel or perceived rate of exertion, RP, rate of perceived exertion. Anyways.
And it's also a great way to help mitigate potential injuries from happening due to overtraining, or you're not fully recovered from your last session. Now you're going back in it hard. And that's just, a very simple way to mitigate injury.
Which is another great question. And we don't got too much longer here because we don't keep these podcasts too long. We're not Joe Rogan, and we've got things to do and people to see. And so I guess a good question that I think a lot of people have, and it's maybe a question I might even have, or at least had for a long time, is how do I, like as an athlete, how would I know generally when to maybe taper back a training day or something like that? Just I guess generally speaking, because I see so many people fall into this pitfall of overtraining and just doing things maybe that they shouldn't. So, from your practitioner standpoint or your specialty or professionalism, what would be your general advice? Like, hey, just a general indicator if you feel like crap, like either don't train or go lighter.
Yeah. So
I guess what would be your advice, or what would you define as, if I told you I'm feeling a certain way, what would you have to hear for you to be like, I think you shouldn't train today and you should do active recovery?
Yeah. So 3 things pop up in the top of my head. Number 1, is the person trying to get out of the workout?
That's a great question.
It could be a mental
That is
thing.
a great question.
Some people need to be pushed mentally, But then on the other side of the spectrum, you have, Gobs here who works out a ton, and I have to pull him back. First, we just gotta find out like why, like where are they at right now. Number two, is there presence of pain? Now, with some of the more hardcore athletes, they have a really high pain threshold. They kind of expect it. They live with it. I do not recommend pushing through any type of pain. Muscle soreness is okay, and typically that should resolve within 48 hours. If not, you should probably scale back or take another off day or active or passive recovery day. And did I give you 3?
Yeah, I think we had 2 or 3. It said no pain. So
No pain.
let's get you pain free.
Yes.
How's your mentality feeling?
Right.
Well, I think it was 2.
Oh,
But that's
shoot.
okay. Like if it's only 2, that's fine. You don't have to have, just because you said 3, you don't have to have 3. But still, like 2 indicators. How's your mentality? How are you feeling physically overall? Is there a presence of pain or not? And I guess that would be like, if there is this presence of pain, advice would be let's maybe scale back and not work out today and do active recovery.
Right. And then kind of like what I was talking about before with how's my nutrition today? Did I get enough sleep? Do I have the energy overall with all these other things that I'm paying attention to now? Are all those cups full?
Yep.
Am I ready to come in?
And as you develop as an athlete, you start to learn these things. You get better at making these decisions on your own. I'm still working on it. I'm not good at it or perfect at it. I'm getting better. But this is where having the coach or
I was actually just going to say that, like
PT.
having even, your services for your athletes, like having a coach do the programming for you because they know where you are at, they know where you want to go to, and they know like what you're capable of. So sometimes you need that oversight to have someone manages for you. Like even the best athletes in the world have their own coaches.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like the presence of a coach will make difference, like such a big difference. And maybe not so much from like the programming standpoint or whatever, but it's more like that. Like I'm very good at being told what to do, but when you leave me to my own devices,
Right.
that's when things can get a little dicey for me. I start to get maybe self-destructive with the amount of volume I want to do or stuff like that. And so it's so helpful to have people that just can give you their general advice. It's like, hey, I feel like this today. I slept 3 hours last night. I skipped breakfast. I'm a little stressed out, and I'm feeling really beat up and sore, but I'm still going to go for it in today's workout. But if you have that advice from someone like Dr. Ken or myself, it's like, hey, after everything you just told me, here's what I think you should do.
Right.
And I think a lot of people succeed with that. So that's like one of the importances of having that coach or that practitioner in your life is not just for their specifics of I need someone to write a workout for me or I need someone to work on my body or stuff, but it's also like this relationship you build that's helping you become more successful. That's like, hey, we're also going to give you this professional advice that everyone needs to hear, including myself. That's like, hey, here's what I think you should do today based off of what you just told me. Mm-hmm. And man, the value of that, in my opinion, is so high. That's something I've come to really find super important as I develop and get older as an athlete and my mentality gets better. They always say youth is wasted on the young, and the reason for that saying is because my mentality is stronger than it's ever been, and I've got more of this growth mindset, and I'm ready to be an athlete more than I ever have been in my life. But I'm also the oldest I've ever been in my life.
Right. So that mentality you talk about, I mean, I think it's so important. Like some athletes will make decisions of, I just want to get into high school track and I'll do whatever it takes, even if I'm running through this pain. I need to, get lettered into varsity. So for next year, for next few months, I'm just going to suffer through it versus that mentality you just mentioned where if I'm seeing myself as a lifelong athlete, one day or 1 week of training and taking off or whatever, not at the intensity we're training at, is not going to derail 10 years of training and where I want to be when I'm 50, when I'm 60, when I'm 70. So having that growth mindset of what kind of athlete do I want to be in X number of years versus now.
Yep, and that's like a question I ask my people all the time. It's something I've learned the hard way. That's like, hey, is your goal to like feel okay through the workout today, or is your goal to feel great in 6 months? And they're like, well, obviously I would love to feel great in 6 months and like be more fit, strong, whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, let's think about that rather than just what we're doing today and having to be like, oh man, I have to work through this pain, so maybe I can make varsity or whatever. It's like, okay, well, let's say you make varsity and you end up doing detriment and kind of jacking things up for months or years.
Yeah, and then
to
you
come.
ruin your potential to get a scholarship to play D1.
Exactly. Or it's like if you would have scaled back, maybe you didn't make varsity, but you stayed healthy and you ended up coming back stronger. And now we have a longer athletic career that we're able to move for a longer period of time, more pain-free. And it's like you just see that investment pay off. That, man, if I just would have had that advice when I was going through it or younger, it would have been so great. But
Same here.
Hindsight's 20/20, right? But that's why we're here for you, especially Dr. Ken from Unite Rehab Perform. He is here for you and to help you become a high-level athlete and perform, and to also maybe wrangle you in when you need some wrangling as far as like training and resting and overtraining. So where is Unite Rehab located?
We're located in Thornton, right down the road from your gym here. Maybe like a 10-minute drive or so.
Ish.
So right off 25 off Thornton Parkway and Washington Street.
Great. And if somebody wanted to come see you, how could they book their first session? And do you offer like your intake session? Is it like a free intake session?
Yeah,
or
so
trial?
we do a complimentary movement screen, and you sit down with one of our physical therapists, and it's roughly like a 30-minute session. We'll get some of your history, what you're looking to accomplish, and get a general sense of how you're moving overall. And based off of what we find there, we can tell if like we're going to be a good fit for each other. If I can help you get to your goals. You can find us on our website and book your appointment through there, uniterehab.perform.com. We're on all your social media handles and channels.
The social media is just Unite Rehab Perform.
Yeah.
Sweet. And so maybe if you're local, you can hit up Dr. Ken for a free evaluation intro session. But maybe if you're not local and you're hearing this podcast, would there be a way that they could maybe ask any questions or message or for any advice?
Of course. I'd love to be able to help people, even if you're not local. Shoot us a message through the website, and we can get put in touch, and I can help you find the best available resources in your area.
Or if there's social media people, can they slide into your DMs?
Absolutely.
Just slide on into those DMs. Awesome. Well, I can testament that what you're doing is amazing stuff, and it's a breath of fresh air relative to my personal experiences with the physical therapy and healthcare industry. And it's kind of given me a new hope for the performance side of physical therapy, which I wasn't as maybe aware of or thought about as much prior to working with you. And that's one of the main reasons that I wanted to have you here, was to help educate people that say, hey, PT is not just for recovering from injury or ailments. It's also to increase performance and just increase your body's ability to move and to feel better while it's moving. Our bodies are meant to move, and they're meant to move without pain.
Yeah,
and that's literally
100%.
what Dr. Ken does.
100%.
Is he's going to help you get to moving with as little pain or maybe no pain as possible. And that's why I love going to see you. I think I have an appointment tomorrow. So we're going to wrap up. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on?
No,
okay.
I think we covered a decent amount.
Yeah,
that was
dude.
great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. Like I said, if y'all want to see Dr. Ken, hit him up. Love to have you. And if you're in the Thornton, Denver area and you want to come work out with us, we're CrossFit MOB in Thornton, Colorado. You can see us on our website, crossfit-mob.com, social medias, CrossFit MOB, or you can hit us up via email or text, info@crossfitmob.com or 720-317-8763. Until next time, this has been Off the Couch Podcast. Dr. Ken, thanks for coming. Now get off the couch and go do something, y'all. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Off the Couch Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, let's try to find something that inspires us to get off the couch.